what I thought would be interesting to do, we're going to see multiple examples of immigrants and stuff, of people coming into this country. And I'm lucky enough to, I live in Deerfield, and I'm lucky enough to have the resources to put together a fair amount of information about immigrants coming into the town of Deerfield. So I'm going to focus on them tonight. A lot of what I have to say will be applicable to other towns. But there are birth records that we have every year for Deerfield. So that's one of the things I want to focus on. The charts that I gave you earlier on are the number of children by Polish or German or Irish immigrants. All of the parents of these kids were born in Europe. And so the frequencies, beginning in 1850, which is when I can pick it up, that's a point where both German and Irish immigrants are coming in to Deerfield, and at that point, Greenfield. Because the key date here is 1896, when the state legislature gave the southern part of, or the northern part of Deerfield to Greenfield. So you're gonna find that reflected in the information. So we start off in there, there's a blue line. Those are German immigrants, and they're coming in when the cutlery shop needs workers, the Russell Cutlery concern. It went big time. There was a time where Russell Cutlery was known across the country. If you were traveling west in your wagon trains, you needed a Russell-made knife or knives. So they were brought in. They were actually recruited in Germany as skilled metal workers to come here and work in the Russell Cutlery factory. So you'll see an increase up until the 1870s, and then you'll see a decline. And that has to do with the fact that we had a depression in 1879 and things crashed. And then it slips out, and you'll see them disappear in 1896, which basically means that they didn't go anywhere, is the records changed. And so now all people born in Cheapside of German parents are Greenfieldites, not Deerfieldites. Same thing works for the Irish. About 1850, Greenfield becomes the meeting point of east-west and north-south railroad lines. And a lot of the Irish are coming in as railroad workers. These are the guys who were building the tracks and the bridges and the culverts and laying those lines. And when they crossed, those lines were pretty well done except for moving west. So a number of the Irish continued to move west with the railroads. They go north into northern Vermont, west into New York, and out across the country. But others stayed. And it was just after the Civil War in the 1870s that the Turners Falls mill works started. And so a lot of the Irish became mill workers. And you'll see the peaks there too. But there were also mills in Greenfield. And then they suffered the same thing with when we have depressions, the mill workers go down, so they go down and down and down. And then the Eastern Europeans come in. And initially about 1890, 1892 into this part of the valley. Some of them were earlier to the south. And it was a fairly slow process in the 1890s. Just for the hell of it, I figured there must be enough Polish families in there, they may actually recognize an ancestor. If I can give you some names, early people who were born here early, and the families. But the first person of Polish descent to be born in Deerfield was Katrina. I got get some light. All right, we'll work this out. Kurowski, daughter of Joseph Kurowski and Pamela Sojka. That was in 1892. So if we look at the charts then, by 1901, the number of births had jumped to 10 births per year. Between 1910 and 1923, annual births ranged between 31 and a peak of 52 in 1918. Shortly thereafter, the number of births to Polish and Eastern European immigrants plummeted to a low of the 20s per annum, and then dropped below 20 per year in the early 1930s. You want to take a guess at why? Two things: First World War and the Great Depression. And the fact that in 1924, the U.S. government cut off overseas immigration into the United States. They started in 1895 in keeping the Chinese out, but 1924, every European, unless they had certain qualifications, were barred from entering the United States. But it's interesting how rapidly things progress and change. 66 men were married between 1905 and 1910, so I consider these some of the earlier folks in town. And one of them, Kowalski, was a semi-skilled laborer. That meant he was probably a butcher or a baker. A Sadowski in 1906, a Sokolowski in 1906, Jacob Nuss, Jabanowski, Kakoni, I think that's how you pronounce it, Kislowski, Koloski, Galensky, and Podlow. All of these had become, in the census data, farmers who owned their own land. So within one generation, we had gone from farm laborers brought here to the docks in New York and where else. Folks met them at the dock, at the piers, brought them north. They were essentially bought by Yankee farmers to work farm labor to pay off the passage. And it took everybody about 2 years to at least clear that debt. And from that point on, they could work independently. Now, numbers and stayed on the farms. We're going to hear from Walter tonight about his father staying on the farm and actually learning the trade. He was not a farmer when he arrived.
So this is a version of the indentured.
Yes. There were agents that met Poles on the docks and would actually pay for their train transportation north. And one of them lived in South Deerfield and is reputed or has said that himself that he had found work for 3,000 Polish people getting off the boat. And then, just for curiosity, and I was looking at Well, how well were they doing? And so the last statistic really has to do with men who own property. And in 1915, there were 713 adult males living in Deerfield, and of these, 151 were Polish, Ukrainian, or other Eastern European, or about 21% of the adult population. So within the decade, they'd really improved. They owned 13% of the housing stock, and a lot of what they had managed to buy were actually old farms, smaller farms, but they had the houses, they had the barns, sometimes they had the tobacco barns, and they had enough fields of mowing and pasture and cultivated fields to actually approach self-sufficiency. The story's much broader than that. There's a lot of interrelationships. Early Poles came in early. They were the refuge for later Poles. The agents gave it up because by 1906, I think it is, the Poles had figured out they didn't need an agent. They had already had people come up here, settled, and had sent letters back home or elsewhere. A number of people didn't come here originally off the boats. They went to Pennsylvania to work in the mines. So anyway, that's a short story, and I'll get back to Jeanne now, and I'll pick it up later.
Thank you.
I started my presentation, and I work at the Cumtock Valley Memorial Association in Deerfield, Massachusetts. I'm the business manager there, but I've also become the project manager for our Eastern European project. We had been doing several festivals throughout the 1990s and into the 2000s and had to stop because of financial reasons during the Great Recession. We've had a lot of interest because of the Deerfield 350th birthday in 2023. And so I said, we need to tell the story of these Eastern Europeans who came here, and they've sort of been forgotten, and I felt it's so important to tell their story. Next slide. So we received a grant from the Mass Humanities, and it's a stories grant to expand, interpret, collect, and share narratives about the Commonwealth, about people who haven't been in the public view in a long time. So the setting is rural Poland in the 1880s into the 1920s. This is a postcard of a Polish rural scene circa 1917, and you can see the thatched houses and the wagons and the horse. My grandparents came from the Galicia part of Poland that was very agricultural. There are other people who came from the German and Russian parts of Poland that had more industry, but not a lot. Poland, next slide. As you can see on this map, Poland had been partitioned 3 times in 1772, 1792, and 1795. By Russia, Prussia, and the Austrian Empire. It was due to wars, weak government, and an uneducated serf population. And you can see in the lower right corner, Galicia is where many of the immigrants came from, although there are a fair number that came to Deerfield from the Russian partition. Poland did not become an independent nation again until after World War I in 1918. Next slide. This is a quote, and this is a map of showing parts of Ukraine. My grandfather was born in Galicia, the crown lands of southern Poland and part of Ukrainian territory controlled by Austria. He married in Russia, and then he died in Ukraine, and he had always lived in the same house. So this illustrates he, was a citizen of 3 different countries. The birth, marriage, death records are held in different locations, different countries even today. Some of them are written in Latin for the Austrian part, some in Russian, and some in German. So the people who first came to the Connecticut River Valley in the 1880s, the Civil War had changed the population. Young people were moving away to cities. Education was important. The advent of the academies, where people no longer wanted to do farm work, which is very difficult, backbreaking, and very subject to the weather. Other Yankee families chose to move west, where they could have large 100, 200 acre farms. And the New England farmers struggled to compete with those larger farms, and they began experimenting with tobacco and onion growing. These crops grow well in the soil here, but they are very labor intensive, and there was, a decline in population. So they began to look for immigrants who were coming from Eastern European countries. Labor brokers began to recruit in Poland at New York's Castle Garden and Ellis Island. Next slide. This is a photograph of a mother and a daughter posing in their traditional costumes from Ukraine. This family, their daughter came to Chicopee, and she married another Eastern European immigrant, and they raised a family of 9 children. But I love the photograph because of the costumes. It's so unusual to see them pictured like that. Next slide. This is a map of Lithuania, and there were similar issues in that part of Russia, Poland, famine, overpopulation, crop failure. Many of the families had subdivided their land so many times, and there were so many children, there weren't enough plots of land to be productive. The other issue was ongoing wars. There was conscription in the Russian army, for example, where my great-grandfather was conscripted for 10 years. He didn't have a choice, and when his term of service was up, he hopped a freighter from Gdansk, and he ended up in Glasgow, and then took a steamship to New York City. This is where many immigrants left from Europe at the port of Hamburg, Germany, and it's a postcard I found online at the Library of Congress. My grandparents came on a large ship in steerage, as many people did. Between 2,000 and 3,000 people were crammed into the hold between 10 days and 2 weeks to get here. The next picture is landing in Ellis Island, the people embarking from the ship. Next slide. This is the ship's manifest of my grandmother, Antonina Asmola. She came from Mielec in Galicia, which was part of Poland. She listed her occupation as a servant, and she could read and write in Polish. She had $16 in her pocket, and she paid for her own passage. She was going to Turner's Falls, where she had a relative by marriage, Frank Zach, who owned a farm up in Gill. Next slide. Everyone had to go through an inspection process through Ellis Island, and John Skibisky, who's been very generous sharing all of his research, had found a man named Vincent Jankowski, who had immigrated to Turner's Falls from Lithuania. He was an employee or administrator at the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service at Ellis Island, and he helped interpret for many Polish immigrants coming off the boat, like getting on the correct train or boat or wherever they were going. There is one legend that says there were people who had gotten off at the boat in New York and were looking to go to Chicago, and someone misinterpreted what they asked, and then instead they ended up in Chicopee, Massachusetts. So Mr. Jankowski was a well-educated man. He was a conductor on the Turner's Falls Greenfield trolley line, and then he moved to Boston to become a teacher at a night school there to teach immigrants English. And then I'm not sure how it happened, but he became an inspector at the Ellis Island immigration station. Later on, we found some instances where he was investigating fraud involving Polish immigrants and these unscrupulous agents who were trying to bilk and lie to Polish immigrants who didn't speak the language. Next slide. This is a chart from a book that's wonderful. It shows the different races or nationalities coming into the United States, going back to Europe, and the net gain, and approximately how many of them went back. Interestingly enough, the Hebrew people, only 5% went back, which is not surprising given the pogroms and horrible things that were happening. The Polish people, they have a number of 40%, and I'm not sure how accurate that is because many Polish people came to the United States to earn money, and then they were going to go back and buy land, and then they changed their mind. Although they did go back to get friends and family and bring them back. So what I'm not sure about is the immigration into the United States might mean multiple trips, and that's why it may be as high as 40%. The Ruthenian Rusniak are the Ukrainian people, and Lithuanian have much lower rates of return. Next slide. There were agents who even went to Europe, to Poland, and were trying to recruit workers. This is a 1907 advertisement written in Polish to recruit people to come to America and work in the Ludlow Manufacturing Company for wages for various textile jobs within the factory. Someone had done a very nice translation. So rent for a 4-room apartment is $5 to $6 a month. The weekly salaries for boys and girls are between $5 and $6.50 a week, and women spinners $6.75 to $9.25, and men who had more skills could earn even beyond the $9.25. Next slide. I did want to talk a little bit about the history and the background of the valley. This beautiful valley that we love so much was first settled by the Native American people, the Pecumtucks, and this is a drawing by Will Sillen of Sunderland of land use at Pecumtuck circa 1550. Next slide. This is a fragment of an early land survey of Deerfield, Massachusetts, circa 1686, and it's in our museum collection. And you can see how the plot lines are long and narrow, and they go to the river. Next slide. Just want to talk a little bit more about the Algonquian people. They moved around their homelands frequently, setting up weetus in different places at different seasons of the year. They catching fish in the spring, cultivating fields and hunting game seasonally. This was a mobile lifestyle, and it came into conflict, as you can well imagine, when the English came to this part of the land. This is a low impact use of the land, and they viewed the landscape as community territory, land stewardship versus land ownership. So the flat meadows of the Connecticut River Valley were formed from glacial deposits from Lake Hitchcock. Free of rocks, the rich soil is 15 feet deep, a mixture of sand, silt, and clay that makes it ideal to grow crops, especially onion and tobacco and potatoes. They call it Hadley loam, which is less prone to erosion. It's a dream soil for a farmer. Next slide. So Peter mentioned some of the labor agents, and there was one very notorious man from Northampton, Charles T. Parsons. He recruited between 5,000 and 6,000 workers at Castle Garden, New York, between 1878 and 1899. However, he got into some serious trouble. He had chained a young Polish man that he was trying to return to New York City to a wagon in the midst of a snowstorm in Holyoke. And some people had come and seen this young man chained to the wagon without any proper clothes or blankets or covering. And so he was summoned to court and he was prosecuted. Next slide. And he did not receive any jail time, but he received a $500 fine from the court in Holyoke, and he was forbidden to bring any more immigrants to Northampton. Another labor agent who was quite interesting from South Deerfield, he lived in the Mill River section, was Francis Clapp. This is a newspaper ad that I found in the 1890s in one of the newspapers, and so he had placed these ads all over to get workers for farms and factories. One story that he was interviewed about, he had secured places for approximately 3,000 people. He said, I sent them to places in each of the New England states, men and women, boys and girls. I treated them well, and I found them many suspicious, but they were square as a rule. The yarns told them by some New York agents and by others who desired to make money out of them at times caused trouble. One day I brought 18 to South Deerfield. The New York agent had told them they had friends in the vicinity. Of course, I knew nothing of this, and I did not have an interpreter, and we could not talk. They realized they had been deceived, and they were determined to go back. So they were frightened and left in a drove. Interestingly enough, he had some sort of a license from the town of Deerfield, which Peter Thomas has been helping me try to research. I would be interested to see what kind of a license it was to bring people here. And he secured a young woman to be his interpreter who spoke 7 different dialects. And he writes, she could do as much work in the house as any girl that we had. And then, unfortunately, she went back to New York after a time. The young men who came here started as laborers first, and then they became sharecroppers. The young women worked in domestic jobs, nannies, housekeeping, cleaning, and things like that. Next slide. This is some statistics from 1900 in Deerfield. They had divided out the people who came from Russian Poland versus Austrian Poland. So it's interesting, the average age of a married Russian Pole was 33. He had been married for 8 years, and he had been in the United States for 5 years. If you look at the next line, the average age for a single young man was 22, and he had been in this country for 3 years. Next slide. This is another interesting chart from the census records showing the different occupations. Most of the young men in Deerfield were farmers or farm laborers. You can see up at the first line, 77% were laborers, 3% were farmers. Others worked on the railroad, in the sawmill, different mills, teamsters, and some were just not recorded. So in 1900, there were 73 Polish people. At the bottom, they recorded the young women. 14 from Austrian Poland were servants, 9 were from Russian Poland, and then not recorded, and I'm guessing the high number, 14, is because they were probably married and or just taking care of the house and the children. Next slide. There's a concept called chain migration, and that's where one person comes and they decide they like it here, and they encourage other friends and family to follow. This is a picture of my grandparents. My grandmother is in the center, and that's my dad on her lap, age probably 1.5. Her husband is standing directly behind her. When she came to the United States, she worked at the Griswold Cotton Mill for 2 years before she had married, and she sent money home to educate her sister and her brother. Her sister went to the convent school, and you can see her in her nun's habit next to her. And then up in the top right, my great uncle, she sent him to a seminary, and then he trained in Rome to become a priest. Next slide. So the Skibitsky family worked in farming. This is John Skibitsky's great-grandfather, Roman Skibitsky. This is them weeding onions, and it is very hard, back-breaking, difficult labor. And we have one lady in the audience tonight that has firsthand experience of working in an onion field. There's an onion shovel on the right-hand side. That's from a museum collection. He came to Sunderland in 1888. He had first tried different occupations. He was even in Iowa, and he didn't like the lifestyle there, so he came back to Sunderland, and he was taught farming by a local farmer. Next slide. This is a newspaper article from the Montague Reporter, 1892. Cheap farm help are being employed by many farmers in the hill towns of Franklin County at wages from $6 to $12 a month and board. The help came from Poland, Austria, Ireland, and interestingly enough, Finland. Good Yankee farm help is scarce, and naturally the foreign element appears to be driving the young men natives away from the hills. But I think they wanted to go on their own anyway. Farming was a very difficult life. On the right, you can see tobacco farming, Eastern Europeans, taken by the Howes brothers circa 1901, and that's from our museum collection. Next slide. This is taken by Francis and Mary Allen, deaf women photographers who were school teachers, and once we were unable to hear, they became photographers, and they have some wonderful photographs. They took this of a Polish family harvesting onion on the Mill River Plain circa 1912. Next slide. There are a series of newspaper articles in the Springfield paper, Boston paper, Greenfield paper about how Poles have been able to get rich on New England farms where the Yankees fail. There's I have a notebook that I'd be glad to share, and you could look at the newspaper articles. They solve labor problems by using the entire family in the fields. Mothers, boys, and girls get out with the father and help convert holdings into highly productive properties. The case of two brothers who have wives and 19 children raising crops on their joint estates, short on English talk, but long on energy, thrift, and cash. Next slide. This is a little chart that I had done. I was interested in some of the Deerfield tax valuations that Peter had shared with me, and I was comparing people from the 1904 one to 1915, and I said, well, what was it like when they came from Ellis Island? Like, how much money did they have? So I just found a chart that had an average of about $20 per immigrant when they came here. So these 4 immigrants, Frank Dahosky, Joseph Schlosky, Anthony Wysocki, Frank Kayla, and Joseph Bernosky, at approximately $20 when they came here, let's just say in the late 1890s. And by 1915, in the green chart, you can see Joseph Bernosky has land, barns, livestock valued over $8,000. So in 15, 17-year time span, some of these people had become very successful. Next slide. This is a beautiful home of Joseph and Fanny Baranowski, circa 1900. It's located on Hillside Road in South Deerfield, from the Howes Brothers photo collection.
Do you know if the house is still standing today?
Well, that was a research project that I didn't get to yet. So they had...
That house is still standing.
Thank you. So they had immigrated from the Russian province of Lithuania in 1893. His wife from Fanny also came with them, and they had 5 children. So the Howes brothers were very famous photographers that had gone around the county and taken these really landmark, beautiful pictures. So here's someone, with approximately $20 to his name, and he was able to buy a house. A lot of them were mortgaged, obviously, but they were very frugal in their savings and were able to purchase the land and the buildings. You can see the barns behind there. Next slide. This is the onion storage building of Anthony Wysocki. He was very successful, very prominent. They had a prominent connection with the Skavisky family, and they used their funds to put together and get these onion houses to store the onions, and they would make a large profit by storing the onions during the year and then selling at quite a profit. Next slide. I found this postcard online. I said, oh my gosh, I have to have this. This is a pickle factory and salting station in South Deerfield. circa 1911, and you can see all those piles of cucumbers up there. And I'm sure there are people in this audience who worked at the pickle factory as teenagers during the 50s and 60s. Unfortunately, the pickle factory did close in the 1990s. Next slide. There was a great deal of prejudice, discrimination, nativism, because of the language barriers, also because most of these immigrants were very strong Catholics. There's a series of newspaper articles, are we to be Polonized? The inroad of not altogether a desirable class of foreigners, someone had written this in the newspaper in 1900. They turned to account all their landed as true as a matter of necessity, and bringing the same methods to bear here, it is probable that a Polish family will thrive where an American family would starve. Thus the question arises whether this is the best that can be done with the abandoned farms of New England and other sections of their country. We do not think it is. Next slide. This is a cartoon that I found from the Library of Congress about the immigration situation circa 1891. These immigrants are arriving at Castle Clinton in New York City, and they refer to the immigrants as German socialists, Russian anarchists, Polish vagabond, Italian brigand, English convict, Irish pauper, and that they weren't really welcome here. Next slide. We have some positive Polish articles in the same year, 1900. Polish farmers value Polish help. The incoming feeling was that on the whole, the writer thinks the many Poles will be a benefit to the people in these towns financially, and the children who are now attending our primary schools will become good citizens. What should we do for help? It is asked by our farmers, were it not for the Poles. Next slide. This is a postcard of the train station at South Deerfield where many of the immigrants arrived. Cyrus Brown was the station agent for the New York and New Haven and Hartford Railroad. He lived on Main Street in Old Deerfield. He actually went so far as to learn the Polish language so he could greet the immigrants when they came to Deerfield. I think that was an extraordinary thing. And he helped them find homes or trains to the next location or the farms where they were going to. He passed away in 1930, and this was just an extraordinary story. I had no idea. My cousins tell the story that when my grandmother came to Turner's Falls on the train, the train was pelted with rotten tomatoes. So I was pleased to see that someone was appreciative of the immigrants. Next slide. There were so many Polish, Ukrainian, Lithuanian farmers buying up the land in the valley that people began to get concerned. And the main crops were onion and tobacco and also potatoes. And Massachusetts Agricultural College, which is now UMass, had been watching all these purchases of land, especially in Hadley and Amherst, and felt like they needed to educate the Polish farmers with the best methods of producing crops, crop rotation, scientific methods of raising crops. So they held the first Polish-American Farmers' Day in Amherst in 1911. This is a poster that was shared with me by John Skibisky. And one half is all written in Polish, and the other half is written in English. And I especially enjoyed at the bottom, ladies are invited to come, especially for the afternoon. Next slide. This is a chart of Deerfield agricultural products. And at the top, you can see dairy products, and then you can see tobacco in 1905, and then the vegetables start to become more prominent. I have to find some more information going into 1915, 1925, but onions certainly, and cucumbers and potatoes were big farm crops. Next slide. This was just 1915 state census, the Polish and Lithuanian population. There were 51 in Conway, 458 in Deerfield, 565 in Greenfield, 964 in Montague, 269 in Sunderland. 83,373 were Polish-born residents, and 12,751 were Lithuanian-born. So these people came to Deerfield for the farms, Sunderland for the farms, Northampton farms and factories. One statistic is in 1930, 80% of the farmland in Northampton was owned by Eastern Europeans. Hatfield, there were some factories there, but there were a lot of farms. Turner's Falls, mostly factory work, as well as Ludlow. Next slide. When people came, they wanted to recreate their homeland, which is a term called Polonia. They wanted their church, their religion, their customs, their heritage to not be forgotten. One of the first churches found in Franklin County for the Polish was Our Lady of Czestochowa Church in 1912. At first they worshiped at St. Anne's Church, and then when St. Mary's was built in 1892, they were told by the bishop to go there. They weren't allowed to hear masses in Polish. The main language was Latin, but the sermons and the hymns and other speeches were given in English, and they wanted it in their native language. So they petitioned the bishop for a Polish priest, and he came on an itinerant basis. And they were not allowed to say the Polish Mass in the main part of the church. They had to hear confession and say the Mass in the basement. Next slide. There were other churches in South Deerfield. This is the Holy Spirit Ukrainian Catholic Church that was founded in 1920. There's a smaller group of Ukrainians who wanted to have their own church, and they formed it. Land was donated by families, and it was built from a shed that was rehabbed and upcycled, so to speak, into this beautiful church. If you ever get a chance to go inside, it's absolutely beautiful inside. Next slide. The St. Stanislaus Church was built in 1930. They began forming a Polish parish in 1895. Roman Skibicki was one of the original founders of that. Next slide. The Holy Name of Jesus was a splinter group. They broke off in 1929 of the Polish National Catholic Church. They observe some Polish traditions today, but their liturgies are in English, and their congregation includes a mixture of people of strong, limited, and even no Polish heritage. They are the only non-Papalist Catholic parish in Northern Pioneer Valley. Next slide. So one impact of the immigrants were they married and they had children. This is a second grade class from South Deerfield, circa 1908, and you can see some of the Polish names. Stella Jablonski, Stanley Bukiewicz, and their teacher. And off to the right is a new grammar school that was built in 1913 to accommodate this growing, burgeoning population. And it was very important to the town that the schools be healthy. They had plenty of windows, bathrooms, light, and teachers in a proper classroom, because at one point in Deerfield had 12 one-room schoolhouses. Next slide. Another thing that I wanted to point out, this is a wedding photograph of my grandparents from 1907. So if you look at the picture, they are all young people. There are 19 adults, all of whom were under the age of 30, and their 2 children. But there are no aunts, uncles, grandparents. So they came here with no adult supervision, so to speak. And so they formed their own communities, their own ways of life. Next slide. This is a picture of Roman Skibicki, circa 1910. He was president of the St. George Society, and they were a benevolent fraternal organization to raise funds for the Catholic Church, St. Stanislaus in Deerfield. Frank Kroll was president, Felix Jablonski vice president, Anton Kaminsky secretary, John Koskonski financial secretary, Alexander Saponsky, and Adam Bakir trustees. And so it was a beautiful photograph that's beautifully preserved in the family. Next slide. There were also Polish women's groups. This is a picture from 1959 of the Polish Women's Alliance, and my grandmother Antonina was the secretary there. Next slide. One interesting thing that I found was my family owned shares in the Polish co-op store in Turner's Falls. And I never really understood anything about it. I just knew that every January the family would get a dividend check. So I tried to do a little bit of research about the store. I thought it was very unusual. People, set up stores, but what was a cooperative about? So they had founded it in 1920. People paid shares into it, and they had two stores, one on 4th Street and the other one on 11th Street. And Anthony Sojka is actually my great uncle. He was the president, and they incorporated with shares in 1927. Sadly, in 1989, the store was in foreclosure. They had hired some grifters, I guess the word is, to manage the store, and they stole all the cash, and the building was foreclosed on, and it is now the Survival Center. Next slide. This is a painting given to us by Stephen Mignotti's wife, Helen Mignotti. He painted it circa 1945. It's called Polonaise. And this is to show how there were many dances held in South Deerfield, lectures, Polish classes. And we've been trying to identify the young woman. She was from South Deerfield, a high school student, circa 1945, but we just can't figure out her name, sadly. Next slide. If anyone knows anything about her, I would love to know. Peter mentioned the Immigration Act of 1924, the Johnson-Reed Act. They first started to pass some immigration laws in 1920 as a result of World War I. They were concerned about the Bolshevik Revolution, anarchy. There were bombings throughout the United States. So the point of it was to slow down the migration. So it was 3% based on the 1890 census, when there were very few immigrants from Southern Europe and Eastern Europe. So what they were looking for is to exclude Eastern European and Italians and completely prohibit any Asian, Chinese immigrants. And there was a cartoon that was drawn as part of an alien anti-dumping bill newspaper article. Next slide. So there began to become a great deal of work to have these immigrants become citizens. The Polish American Citizen Club was founded in 1927 with 200 members. It was organized to induce all the Polish people to become citizens, and you can see the officers that were elected. And the Polish citizens, almost every town had a Polish American Citizens Club, but the one in Deerfield still survives to this day. Next slide. There were classes in English to become an American citizen. This is one certificate that my grandmother received. She studied English as an advanced course. She received her citizenship as a derivative because my grandfather was naturalized in 1922, but they seem to have lost the record, so she went back to school for the town of Montague for these classes. And there are numerous certificates, like she was going every year. By then, her children were all in school. She had 9 children, and so she was taking these classes every single year. She was fluent enough that she helped other people in her church translate documents from Polish into English and English into Polish. Next slide. This is a naturalization certificate of my great-great-uncle. He came via Rotterdam from the Ruthenian part of Russian Poland. He came in 1913, and you can see the various name spellings. He's listed on the manifest on Ellis Island, Bogusch, B-O-G-U-S-C-H, and then in this certificate, B-O-G-U-S-H, but actually the family name is Bogusch, B-O-G-U-S-Z. Next slide. In Deerfield itself, there was the great arts and crafts movement, and there were some Polish people who were involved in that. And these are some examples of willow baskets that they were making to display and sell at their events in town. Unfortunately, we're not sure who made the baskets. I have two names. They were workers who lived on the farm with Charles Jones, and they were described as Polish or Magyar, and they made these beautiful baskets, probably from skills that they had brought with them from Poland, and they lived on the farm of Charles Jones. They could either be Louis Johnski, 25, from Russia, Poland, or Stanislaw Bajewski, from 23, from the German part of Poland. They both came to the United States in 1896. And the beautiful wrought iron lampstand is in our collection. It was made in 1898 by Konstantin Zabriskie. Sadly, he left Deerfield, and we're not sure what happened to him, but that's extraordinary metal work, and he sold that as part of the Deerfield Industries sale. Next slide. This man, Stanislaw Sojka, is not related to me, at least according to my grandfather, but this is a picture of him in his military service uniform. And he came from Tarnow, Poland. He was educated in Tarnow College, and he was instrumental in setting up the recruiting station in Holyoke during World War I to recruit Polish people to go back and fight in France for the freedom of not only France, but also Poland. And that is a beautiful recruitment flag. That is also in our museum collection. Circa 1918, but if you'll notice up at the top, the eagle does not have a crown on it, unlike the Polish eagle, but Americans felt that we were not a kingdom, we don't have kings, we don't have dictators, so we should not have a crown on our flag. Very interesting, given today's situation. Next slide. This is a wonderful picture of Paul and Stefania Sadowski. They're standing before their River Road home in South Deerfield, circa 1906. And there are numerous newspaper articles that I found through an online subscription to our local library. And one was identifying polls by numbers from 1908 in Turner's Falls. It states that the mail clerks at the local post office have an original way of serving the Polish-speaking persons. Many of them have unpronounceable names, and after their names are once on record, they receive numbers. Each person remembers his or her number, and the clerks find it considerable saving of time to take the number rather than the name when the mail is called for. Very interesting. Next slide. This is a wonderful newspaper article with these hand-drawn illustrations. I have the newspaper article if anyone would like to look at it. And in conclusion, a priest in the area had stated, the Slavs work from starlight to starlight when they are paying for a farm, and they are still at it Saturday night when the Yankee or the Irishman is driving into town for a shave and a good time. Next slide. I did a little research because I wanted to know, well, are there Eastern European farmers still in this valley? And I'm sure we can all recognize as we drive down Route 5 some of these names. There's a few in Greenfield, Deerfield, Hatley, Whately, Sunderland, Amherst. I'm sure you recognize the names today. Batinsky, Cheslik, Sykowski, Galensky, Galanka, Yankowski, Kilbasa, and that is a true farming name. Kokowski, Kolakowski, Melniks, Michkowskis, Pashnisniks, Bakarskis, Pazinskis, Rukevich, Sadowskis, Skoskis, Strauskis, Sobieskis, Sazlowskis, Weskevich, Wendelewski, and Janswitskis. And if I've forgotten anyone, I would love to know to add them to my slide deck. Last slide. Just want to say thank you to everyone who came tonight, and Matthew, Sheila, my husband, daughter, and son, Amy, Richard, and Alex Hirschrader, Pam Hodgkins, who faithfully transcribed many of the newspaper articles for me, the Lava Center, Matthew and Jeanne for having us here, PVMA staff, John Skibitsky, who is going to be 95 in June. He wasn't able to make it tonight. And Peter Thomas for so much expertise and knowledge about Deerfield records. Thank you.
I want to point out something that Jeanne mentioned in terms of like the stereotypes of Polish immigrants. I'm Irish Canadian, but whatever. And I'm an historian by training. My background's in Irish history, but I've also been teaching U.S. history for 20 some odd years. And one of my favorite assignments to give my students is about immigrants and the words used for us. I'm an immigrant, so us. And their job was to figure out which group, which decade the language was from. They never could, because the language used to denigrate my ancestors is the same language used to denigrate Jeanne's ancestors, the same language used today to denigrate Latinx migrants and anyone else who comes here. So the actual language has not changed, which is really interesting because the English language has changed a lot since the 1840s. I have to put yours in.
Yeah.
Which one is it? On your,
And that's the way it was. It's green.
all right. And we have about 45 minutes.
Oh, it'll be shorter than that. I'm only going to play the first part of it.
All right. Bear with me for some technology here.
Just, we were talking about the crops, the tobacco and the onions and whatever. There was an onion warehouse in South Deerfield that held 100,000 bushels of onions. It was next to the railroad tracks. It's gone now because it burned down. So, in 2023, we had, or 24, I don't even remember anymore. Anyway, we had our 350th anniversary for Deerfield. And I was on the steering committee, and one of the things that I really wanted to do was to make sure that all of the Deerfield community, not just the old Yankee, but all the other parts of the community were represented. And one way to get at this was to begin an oral history project. So during the course of that year, my wife and I and a couple of other people did oral histories on 25 people through town. And we're going to continue to move forward with this, although a lot more slowly because I seem to wind up with a lot more on my plate these days. But anyway, what came out of this in part was a 4-part oral history by families that have an agricultural background. And so I put together an oral history excerpts with slideshow that we're going to see. And I'm only going to show you the first version of them, or the first of the 4 tonight. Unless people are really diehard. But anyway, Walter Kanaki, who was 93 when we interviewed him, had been living on the same farm that he was born on, that his parents bought in 1914. So he was born in 1923. And what he's going to do is talk about his life on the farm, what it was like growing up on that farm over the course of essentially 93 years. And I think you can see the transformation of agriculture from a very mixed crop agriculture to focusing on various crops and that sort of thing. The other 3 speakers in this talk about other aspects. Diane Martin, who was a Rakevitz, her memories of her father as a dairyman and growing tobacco. So that's some of what she's talking about. Peter and Stephen Melnick, who still have the dairy on at the bars today are the third representative collection. And then Ashley Randall, who's our present Commissioner of Agriculture, talks about agriculture as she knew it growing up, not on a dairy farm, but where they were raising prime steers for show, or prime cattle for showing. And she grew up showing at fairs and stuff around here. And then at the age of 21, she went to the international competition in Wisconsin. She took first place among 2,000 farmers showing dairy cows. And her cow took first place. And she also took place among the adults, first place. She is one crackerjack person, I'll tell you. So we're going to run the first oral interview with Walter. And if you're interested in following up with this, my son-in-law and daughter were nice enough to give me a website for Christmas. So if you go to peterthomashistory.com, it'll get you to the website, and you can find the rest of this on the web.